Hello, everyone. How's everybody doing today on this beautiful Thursday? Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are so excited to have you today and have a fun-filled agenda for our time over lunch. If you are in here to talk about voting and civic engagement in the Black community, you are in the right place. And before we jump into our wonderful content today, my name is Cecilia Charter. I am on the board of TC BANDD, so Twin Cities Black Affinity Network Development Days. And I'd love to share just a little highlight about the organization before we get into our content today. So for those of you who are new here, our TC BANDD vision is to leverage the scale, scope, and skill embodied within our Black affinity networks to create a broader community in order to deliver quality professional development, build cross-organizational and community connections, create a safe space to learn, share, and grow together. And we do so through a number of ways. We have twice a year, we hold hybrid summits. We offer a number of virtual series throughout the year, which I'll highlight in a little bit. We have a video library of all of our content and a LinkedIn community where we can engage with each other. At the end of the day, our goal is to really create professional excellence through strategic collaboration. TC BANDD currently started in 2023. We are now reaching 15 states, 3 countries, and 2 continents. So shout out to those joining us from Africa and Asia as we continue to expand our reach, our scale, and our scope in supporting the community. So this is session 2 of a 3-part series for Black History Month. If you saw in your registration, we have another session. Our last session for the month is going to be on February 26th. So if you enjoy your time here today, be sure to join us on the 26th as well, where we have a conversation on owning, understanding, and leveraging the power to drive your career. There'll be another fireside chat over lunch with Dr. Greg Kirkfleet, who is the VP of HR Operational Services and Product at Target. It'll be co-facilitated by our founder, Eric Alexander. And just a snapshot of the events that we have for this year. So we're in the middle of our Black History Month virtual series. You could expect another Juneteenth celebration this year, as well as our hybrid conference that'll happen this June. Over the summer, we'll continue to provide a number of virtual series like these. And then in November, we'll have our second hybrid in-person summit and so much more planned. So continue to stay connected with us in order to see what we have coming. And in order to stay connected, there's a number of ways you can do so. So through our website, tcband.org, you can find us on Instagram, join our newsletters. We have a LinkedIn group and a YouTube channel to catch our content. So feel free to snap a picture of this, grab your favorite way of connecting via platforms, and stay connected to us. We love to hear from you. We'd love to see you at future events. All right. Let's get into it. So I want to welcome with us today, Khyla Craine, who is the Deputy Director at the state of Michigan. I personally hate doing other people's intros. I feel like folks share their stories the best coming from their own mouths. So I'm going to hand it over to Khyla. First, thank you for joining us today and welcome to the conversation. But I'd love for you to take a moment to introduce yourself to the community. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much, Cecilia, for having me. So I am Khyla Craine, bringing you greetings from my hometown. I call it Championship City of Ann Arbor, Michigan. Go Blue for any of y'all who are Michigan fans here. I am a graduate of 2 HBCUs. I'm proud double HBCU graduate, South Carolina State University, where I had a wonderful time there and really catapulted me to the work that I do today that we'll get to talk a little bit about during our time together. And I'm also a graduate of Howard University School of Law, which continued to allow me to do the things that I'm able to do here at the Michigan Secretary of State, where I serve as the Deputy Legal Director for the department, helping the Secretary in our various business areas on legal and policy compliance. I think I saw one of my colleagues, Shelley Belton from our Bureau of Elections, who is with us today, and so grateful for her presence. And so I get to be a lawyer by trade, but a civil rights advocate by passion. And the work that I do, whether it's here at the Secretary of State's office or in my previous role as Assistant General Counsel for the NAACP headquarters, is centered in my desire to increase and continue our road to civil rights and social justice advocacy. I also happen to be a member of the wonderful sorority of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and I see my soror, Pat Lattimore, is on, who we get to serve together on the National Social Action Commission for the sorority, and I'm honored to be able to serve with her and that she's here with me. So that's a little bit about me, Cecilia.
Thank you for introducing yourself, Khyla. So today we're gonna start with a little bit of an overview on voting that Khyla is gonna share. Then she and I will jump into a conversation, fireside chat on the topic, and then we'll make sure to hold some time at the end for any questions from the audience. So as you're listening today, feel free to throw your questions in the chat at the end once we open it up. We want to hear from you as well. So I'll turn it back over to you and I have you share.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And please let me know. The devil's been busy with my internet this week, so and it's been snowing here in Michigan today. So let me know if there's any connectivity issues. One of the things that I did not say in my introduction is that I come from the Black church tradition. I'm an AME girl through and through, so I do well with responses. So feel free to do a thumbs up or a smiley face or a heart if you hear something that you align with. So I'm really excited to come and talk to you all about voting rights, something that has continued to be a source of consternation and passion for me and folks that look like us across the country and really around the globe. Another thing that I did not tell y'all is that a week from yesterday will be my birthday, and I'm super excited about my birthday, February 21st. And I get to share my birthday with some really prominent voting rights folks. John Lewis, who we know was the last surviving person to speak at the March on Washington, but was also a driver around voting rights in the work that he did even before he became a member of the United States Congress. That was really the impetus of his work. We know about the brutality that he experienced on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, as well as Barbara Jordan and I share a birthday. Barbara Jordan, the first African-American woman to serve in the United States Congress from the South, Congresswoman from Texas, who also happens to be my soror. I am privileged to share a birthday with them because of the work that they did in their lives to further voting rights. We know that Barbara Jordan sat on a pivotal committee during the impeachment of Richard Nixon 50 years ago, and where she declared very strongly her passion about what needed to be done to not only ensure that the presidency was strong, but that our democracy held true. Another thing that happened on February 21st is that Jimmy Lee Jackson was murdered in Selma, Alabama. Jimmy Lee Jackson, a young man who decided that he, like many of his community members, had enough and wanted to ensure that their right to vote was protected and wanted to fight for that right. And because of the advocacy that he was doing, there was a mob that rang out in his local community. And he went and tried to hide as depicted in the movie Selma. And if you saw the movie Selma, you saw what happened to him. And he was killed on February 21st, 1965. And his death sprung and pushed forward the Selma to Montgomery march that John Lewis and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And so many others participated in over the course of the beginning of March in 1965. And so February 21st is a pivotal day for me, not only just because it's the day of my birth, but it's because it has a it has a major through line to our right to vote and how that vote is protected. There is no subject in our United States Constitution that is dealt with more than voting. There are 6 amendments, either directly or indirectly, are centered around our right to vote, who has the right to vote, and how that right to vote is protected. We know about the what we call the Reconstruction Amendments, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment. The 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, that allowed us to be able to be free in the majority of the part. The 14th Amendment that created the birthright citizenship, but it also created the ability for us not to have equal protection. And the last clause of the 14th Amendment, which has been talked about a lot in recent weeks and months, allows us to create legislation, allows the Congress to create a legislation in furtherance of the 14th Amendment. The 15th Amendment to the United States Constitution says that the right to vote shall not be abridged based upon race or previous condition of servitude, meaning that Black men were able to have their right to vote when that amendment was enacted in 1870. So that's just 3 right there that has some type of impact on the ability for folks to vote in our nation. Then you have to go on to the 19th Amendment, of course, for women to be able to get the right to vote in 1920. You also have amendments that talk about the prohibition against poll taxes that lowered the right to vote, the age, of eligibility for folks to vote from 21 to 18. And the reason why that was such a big deal is because young people understood that you are not going to send me off to a war to die if I cannot choose the elected leaders that are sending me to war. This was centered around folks going off to war for Vietnam. And as you know, through your history, there was a lot of issues around folks participating in the Vietnam War. And young people and folks rallied to lower the voting age from 21 to 18. And so all of those amendments, in whole or in part, impact the right to vote and who can vote in our nation. And so when we hear conversations around, should I care about voting? Why should I care about voting? Is my vote going to count? How do I engage in this process? We know that it's not easy to change the United States Constitution. There's a lot of things that have to happen to change the Constitution. And if it was not important, people would not be putting their lives on the line, not just in 1960, but right here today, to ensure that your right to vote is secure, that it's protected, and that all eligible folks have the ability to make their voices heard on big stages like the presidential and senatorial elections, and lower stages like school board and county council and city council. All through, people are volunteering, or that is in their it is in their job description to ensure that the elections administration goes on without a hitch. But people are putting their lives on the line to do that. And if it was not so important, if it was not so critical to all that we do and all that we know to do and be as Americans in this nation, I don't know if people understood that. I'm not sure why the questions are being asked. But what I am excited to talk to you all about today, that it does matter. It does matter whether or not you participate in our democracy. It does matter that you not only participate, but research the folks that you are going to be electing to office. It does matter that you understand that it's not just about voting, it's about engaging your elected officials, going to see them, going to tell them about what's happening in your neighborhood, why it matters whether or not you switch a water source from one to another, and whether the pipes are available and ready to hold that water, and whether or not it will seep lead into the water that will damage the brains of your children and yourselves for generations. Changing generations of people in your city. It matters that you elect people so that they will protect the electors who are sent to Washington to determine who will become the president of the United States. It matters who you elect to determine if they will hold up democracy for all of us. It matters. And if it did not matter so much, they would not be trying to erode your ability to cast your ballot. There would not be a systemic, not declaration, but a systemic effort to roll back opportunities for you to cast your ballot, to put additional barriers for you to cast your ballot, that they saw how Black people vote and then create laws preventing those opportunities that Black people and other people of color utilized to exercise their democracy, and built roadblocks in order to prevent them from doing so if your vote did not matter. And so I encourage all of us here on the call and those people that we are connected to delve into research, not only about what the past victories and efforts were from our ancestors to protect our ability to cast our ballot, but to look what folks like my colleague Shelley and those that work with me in the Bureau of Elections do every day to ensure that all Michiganders and all people in our country are able to exercise their democracy and cast their ballot. One of the questions that I'm posed with a lot is that, well, I'm not really interested in politics. It doesn't really matter to me. I'm just trying to grind out here and do what I can for my children, my family, and just take care of myself. So I don't know why politics really matters with me. And to that I say, when you are born, you get what is called a birth certificate in our country. When you pass away, you will get, or someone will get on your behalf, a death certificate. From the time you are born to the time that you pass away, there is somebody elected or somebody that is appointed by somebody is elected that determines decisions on everything that you do, including how do you obtain a birth certificate and who is able to obtain your death certificate. Whether you're talking about how you are educated, what can you be educated about, how can you get grants to go to college, how can your ability to get a job be protected, whether or not they can discriminate against you because of what you look like, who you love, where you live, your education, your hairstyle, all of those things are all of those things are dealt with by somebody who is elected or that is appointed by someone who is elected. Your organization is based out of Minneapolis, and I need not tell you about the people that are in power in Minneapolis and what they can do about police officers, about other elected officials that deal with the civil or the criminal justice system, and how either the appointed people or the electeds have the power to deal with those systems there in Minneapolis and many cities and towns across our country. So it matters. It matters who sits in those seats. And if you decide to abdicate your ability to participate in our democracy, someone will make that decision for you. Someone will make the decision on who is elected. And there are too many elections that happen in this nation that are decided by less than 10 votes. Very small margins. In my home state of Michigan, the presidential election in 2016 was decided by 10,000 votes. That's not a lot of votes in the grand scheme of things of a state. The 2020 election, the folks in Detroit, which are 14% of our population here in the state of Michigan, that election was decided about 170,000 votes. If the folks in Detroit if the folks in Detroit or in Wayne County voted in the same level as they did in 2016, the election from Michigan could have been drastically different. And I'm not here to call balls and strikes about who was elected in 2016. I'm just talking to you about the data and what is the reality. So you get to decide who will be your representatives. You can decide who will be sitting in your mayoral seats, or you can let someone decide that for you. I choose not to let someone make that decision for me because it's too important. And I will close on this and be able to engage in some of our questions that were posed. I have two goddaughters, Mariah and Malia. Mariah is a spunky 5-year-old, and Malia is trying to stay with her big sister, and she's 3. I can't imagine what they're going to face when they become 18. I can't imagine about all the decisions that they will have between now and they turn 18. But I know that there are people that are in their lives that are making decisions every day on their behalf about what they can be educated about the active shooter drills in their schools, about the lunch that they will be provided if their mom and dad don't provide them a lunch. And I shall not withhold my vote on the people that make those decisions on their behalf, because they cannot do that for themselves. And so if there's no other reason that I am passionate about us participating in our democracy, it's for kids like Mariah and Malia, who cannot make that decision for themselves. And we need to make sure that people are in power that have their best interests at heart, that will make the best decisions for them until they can make it for themselves. So I'm excited to talk to you more about this, and I will toss it back to you.
Thank you, Khyla. That was such a wonderful opening, and I appreciate the message that you're sharing with us today. It matters. Like y'all heard it here. It matters. It matters. It matters. And I think we jump right into that conversation. So even when folks know that it matters, they know it's important, we still see a lot of disengagement. We hear folks saying like, there's no good candidates or no one that I feel comfortable voting for. What do your conversations with people look like? And when people are struggling with the, like, I know it's important, but I don't know if I can put my voice, my vote, my ballot down for any of the candidates in front of me.
Yeah, for that, I say a couple of things. One, you might be the candidate that you're waiting for. We need more smart, thoughtful people who are engaged with our community to run for office. So you just might need to figure out how you sign up and be that elected official that you want to vote for. The second thing is that engaging with, well, I'll say 2A, right? Is that sometimes you're just going to have to figure out that they may get you to like 80% of where you're at. A lot of the conversation that I have heard over the last few years, like, I don't really like him. He's not the great person, or I don't really like everything about him. You're not marrying these people, right? You are electing them for an office. You need to figure out who can get you best to the place that you need to be and hold that person accountable that you're voting for. We're not looking for my boo that I'm gonna come home to. I'm looking for who will be the best person to make the best and most thoughtful decisions on my behalf. And the last part about it is like, it's not the end. Voting is not the end. It is the beginning of this back and forth conversation. I am hiring you for a job, and then I have to do performance reviews. And my performance reviews is not at the next election. It could be every other month. It could be every other week that I need to be checking in with that person that I hired for this job to say, good job, you did that for me. Or you're not pursuing policies that I feel is important for my community. So we need to talk about this. So that's what I would say to folks who, and then find sources that you can find good sources of information about the candidates. There's a lot of chatter. So you sometimes have to cut through the noise to figure out the information that you need about the candidates that are running. So that's maybe 2B.
Yeah, you done two good things right there. I want to come back to some of that, but just kind of continuing off of what you just shared around finding information and finding good information about the candidates. So there's a lot of information coming at us from all sorts of places and sources, whether it is our friends, social media, social communities. What would you recommend for folks about staying informed and finding truthful information to inform their decisions?
Yeah, so well, if you live with here with me in the Great Lakes state, I would encourage you to go to michigan.gov/vote. If you don't have the pleasure of living here in Michigan with us, then I would encourage you to go to trusted sources. I am hoping and wishing that all of our sister Secretary of State's offices and Bureau of Elections, or however they are fashioned in your state, are similar to mine here in Michigan, that we get the best and most accurate information out there. But if that is not your experience, then I would go to places like the League of Women Voters. They have great information there. It's nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that gets great information about candidates and the elections and all that great information. NAACP, I probably couldn't go back to Baltimore if I didn't talk about my own organization. NAACP is doing great work, has been doing great work for time immemorial. And they can help you for all things elections as well. But just try to find some trusted sources that you can get clear, crisp information, and then vet it too. I mean, you can't just go to one source, unfortunately. It's gone are the days that we just have 2, 4, and 7 as our TV channels, and you can't just get one source of information as well. So try to find just a couple of sources. Also, newspapers. We know that some of our newspapers are leaning one way or the other, but there are some tried and true, just straight up and down good newspapers that will provide hyper local information for you around your elections as well. I see some folks are putting in the chat, C-SPAN. Yes, C-SPAN is great. They don't do a whole, well, I was going to say they don't do a whole bunch of commentary. They do on Washington Journal. But if you just want to look to see what the Congress is doing or not doing, turn on C-SPAN and you can see what your democracy really looks like. It's a good show.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, and vet your sources. So making sure you're comparing information, looking for the truth, seeking out those spaces that give you straight up information. Other thing I wanted to come back to that you talked about was voting is just the beginning. So we know voting is not enough. Just voting is not enough. It's an important step. It matters a lot, but it's only the first step. When you talk about broader civic engagement and accountability, how else can people get involved outside of just voting? Prior to the vote and then even post vote. So I would think like before, when campaigns are going, as folks are getting engaged, what does that look like before the actual election? And what does it look like after the election?
Yeah, there's so many ways to engage. If you're talking about before the election, you can participate on somebody's campaign. That's a really great way to see how, the sausage is made. You can contribute to a campaign monetarily or volunteer, be a door knocker, answering the phones from folks. Now, I guess you might need to, some folks probably have social media pages that need to be monitored or updated and whatever else. And so you can participate in that kind of a way. Or you can participate in a nonpartisan nonprofit organization by calling potential electors and reminding them to go vote and letting them know where to participate in their democracy. Post-election, it is engaging with your elected official, writing them, emailing fax if you actually have a fax machine, your elected officials, and letting them know where you stand on the policies that they may be introducing or they may be voting on soon. What my dear Sora Lattimore and I will be doing in a couple of weeks is Delta Days in the nation's capital, where we will have thousands of our sisters of Delta Sigma Theta going to Capitol Hill and letting our members of Congress on both sides of the House know where where we stand on issues and what our priorities are. You can do that as an individual. Most elected officials, particularly those in Washington, have district offices. You can go to that district office, ask to meet with their staff. And what Cecilia and my friend Chanel Autry, who is a colleague of Cecilia's, will tell you is that the staff usually are the ones that do the work. Sometimes the elected official is a nice face that talks a lot, but the real work happens with the staff. And being able to meet with a staffer and talk to them about the issues that are facing your community and maybe policies that you want to be proposed is a great way to engage after the election with your elected official. And I would be doing that on a regular basis so that you can, again, check in with your member, with your elected official about what's going on. Lastly, I will say is that every city council has a city council meeting. Every county council has a county council meeting. There's open meeting acts. There's freedom of information acts. You can request documents. And now because of COVID, it is really it is a lot easier than before to listen in on some of those conversations because many of them are virtual. And so you can be at home with your popcorn, watching the city council meeting, figuring out what they're talking about. And then you might, at the next council meeting, decide to zoom in and give your 2-minute testimony and be done. There's just many different ways for you to engage. You just have to figure out what works best with your schedule and where you want to plug in.
I love that. Just sharing there's, again, multiple ways for you to engage. There's not just one way, and not all of them are super time consuming. You can ensure your voice is heard, make sure you're advocating for the folks that are important to you. You talked about elected officials in Washington. We know we're in the middle of a presidential election, gearing up for
Don't
that.
remind me.
November is coming, y'all. But in addition to the presidential election and, Congress and Senate that we are familiar with, what are some of the other elections that you realize that people often overlook? You talked about earlier how almost every decision, everything in our life is impacted by an elected official or someone appointed by elected official. And there are often spaces where we are getting to the ballot and we're just kind of like, oh, I don't know half of this. I'm coming here for this moment, this big flashy election that is happening. But what are some of those more impactful ones that you feel like people often overlook?
Well, one of the things I will say is the primary election. And a lot of people jump straight to November,
Yeah.
but a lot of things happen where we live in a primary, just because of how where Black people live and the construction of our counties and our cities. Sometimes we live in very hyper partisan areas, one way or the other. And so once you get done with the primary, that's pretty much it. November is likely a rubber stamp on what happened in the primary because it's so overwhelming one way or the other. And by us not participating as in highest levels in the primary, you miss the boat. So that's one of the ways that I would encourage folks to figure out when their primary election is. Here in Michigan, we're getting ready for our presidential primary on February 27th, and we'll begin early voting on Saturday. And so that's a great way for Michiganders to begin in this conversation. But I would not skip your primary elections. That being said, the other types of elections that I really encourage folks, and I saw someone mentioned in the chat, is school board meetings or school board elections. We saw in 2022 a wave of people engaging in school board elections because of the misnomer that critical race theory was being taught in K-12 education. And so we just saw a swarm of folks signing up to run and be elected to the school board so they could reform how that school board and the curriculum that school system will be teaching its young people. So I would pay attention to things like that. Things that may not be cute and sexy have a real impact on your family and your community. Who's running for mayor? Who's running for the water district? Who's running for your state elected officials, your state senator, your state delegate, or House of Representatives member? A lot of people overlook that. But when you're talking about police reform, when you're talking about who can be on a ballot or what your ballot looks like, or how do you access a ballot, when you're talking about driver license issues like we deal with in my office, who can get a license, how do you get a license, how can you restore your license? That's done at the state level. So when you have your eye towards Washington can do but so much. But a lot of things happen. The closer you get to the ground, the more it has an impact on your daily life. So I would be really paying attention to who you're electing to your state houses in state governments.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. We talk about, like, you ever heard the saying, like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So, like, instead of thinking about how we're shifting an entire nation, how do we start shifting our communities, our neighborhoods, our state, our cities? And those are through those local elections that, as you said, the closer you get to that community, the more impactful it's going to have on your day to day. And that practice and that behavior of being active then translates on a larger scale. as we think about, I mean, we missed the, we're in the middle of Black History Month, and you talked about some of those pivotal moments in time connecting to your upcoming birthday. But I'm gonna kind of combine two questions here. So are there any other kind of favorite moments that you have in history where you've seen our collective voice really impact change through voting? And I'll broaden that question a little bit. While we're talking about voting in the Black community, we know that we're not siloed individuals. We are intersectional, multidimensional people. So our identities go across sexuality, gender, ability, et cetera. So you think about like coalitions and people coming together under common causes. Are there moments in time or things that really stand out to you as examples of the power of voting?
Yeah, there's so many. We remember that a couple of weeks ago we were celebrating the 15th anniversary of President Obama's first inauguration. I was there in Washington. It was extremely cold, but you saw the power of coalition and so many people that came together to elect him to the presidency. It was amazing to witness. It was amazing to see the excitement and the possibility and the hope of what could have been. Um, it, yeah, period. We'll do that.
Right.
Trying to edit myself. I would also say the in Alabama and in Georgia in the recent years there was a special election in I think 2017 for the United States Senator for the state of Alabama because the senior senator there was appointed to Attorney General, and so folks had to elect a senator, and folks came out, Black women in particular, came out in droves to elect a new senator for the state of Alabama. Similarly, in Georgia, we had a runoff for a United States senator, and Black people came out in droves to elect in the runoff and in the general election in Georgia. And it has been documented over and over that if Black people Black people generally and Black women in particular did not come out in the levels that they did, that race in Georgia would have come out totally different. So I was proud of Black women and of Georgians to stand up and have their voices heard. We are disproportionately concentrated within the South. The Bible Black or the Black Belt across the South, that is where Black people are most concentrated. And so for us to be able to lend our voice to push through the long lines and the misinformation and disinformation and attempts to silence Black people, and for them to be able to rise up and make a strong difference in the outcome of the election there in Georgia in 2020 was amazing to witness. So I that is one of the things that I am in recent history extremely proud about.
Thank you for sharing that. And in recent history examples as well, like it is not just the work. Well, we appreciate and we are forever in gratitude of the work that happened during the civil rights movement. We're still making history today. Our history is continuing. You heard it here. We're thankful for everyone who's joining the conversation today, but also go tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend. Because when we gather together, when we get in community, when we get in coalitions, when we work across for common interest, that's when we really start to see movement.
Yeah.
Right. I'll ask you one more question before we open it up to the audience.
Okay.
You touched on this a little bit, but we hear the conversation around voter suppression a lot, and barriers to voting. What advice would you give to those listening today around navigating the variety of barriers? Because we know it happens in a number of different forms, some that are more prevalent when we think about the conversation around voter ID or long lines, but they happen in smaller ways as well. So you can get as narrow as broad as you like, but as you think about navigating barriers to voting, what advice would you give those listening today?
Yeah, I would say a few things. One, voter suppression is real, but it's not the end all be all, right? So you have to call a thing, but you don't let that thing deter you, if you feel me, right? So one, if you have a legal background, I would encourage you to participate in some of the election protection operations that happen across the country, whether that is with the National Election Protection Hotline through the Lloyd's Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, whether that is with the National Bar Association, the American Bar Association, whichever. I would encourage you to participate in those, or be local counsel when someone has to sue to keep the doors open on election day, because that is something that happens. But also to take the information that you have heard either from me or from someone else and spread that within the community, because a lie only exists because the truth is not out. The truth is not being able to be spread as quickly as a lie can go around. And so being able to engage with folks, people will trust trusted voices, right? And so if you're able to engage with them in a way that I couldn't, because I'm not of that group or I'm not in that community, they will listen to you. So being able to engage with folks and letting them know the accuracy of how to move through their elections process is critical, I think. But also, again, being engaged with what's going on in your state legislature ahead of time. Sometimes we're too reactive, right? So the monster bill comes out and now everybody's like, oh my gosh, now I can't provide water to folks when they're standing in line. What do we do? What do we do? Well, there was a whole process to get that bill through the legislature, past the legislature, and into the governor's office, that we could have had an opportunity to impact and possibly stop it before it got there. Whether it's you actually being in the legislature or you contacting members of the legislature to tell them your disdain for this piece of legislation, right? Now, my sorority has sued in a couple of places for problematic legislation, and that is warranted and needed. But there's also things that we can do on the front end, but you can only do that if you are engaged in what is happening, what's going on. So I would encourage us to not feel like it's all encompassing. There are, like you said, you can you have to eat the elephant one bite at a time. And there are ways that you can engage with these voter suppression issues to try to stamp them out. The last thing I would say is, it's saying in a different way, but like just kind of pay attention. Like you don't have to be a voting rights nerd like me and just kind of all soaked in or whatever. But if something is your jam, you need to pay attention to that jam. Like if how elections interacts with technology, then you need to pay attention to how AI, artificial intelligence, is moving through elections. That could be your jam, and you're just focused on that. If the issue is voter registration and how people can register to vote, if that's your jam, focus on that. If ensuring that our returning citizens know how they're able to interact with our democracy and dispelling myths that all states disenfranchise people formerly incarcerated. If that's your passion, then work with that community to let them know how they're able to participate. But there is room for all of us to be able to dismantle some of this misinformation, but you got to figure out where you want to plug in and just plug in.
So what I heard you say is you don't got to do it all, but you should be doing something. So
Yep.
find your jam, find the place that you have that passion, that interest, or that you're directly impacted, and lean into those spaces.
Absolutely. Yep.
Love that. All right. I have more questions, but I also want to open up and give some time for the audience. If there's any questions that you all have, feel free to drop it in the chat, and then we will read that out loud. Also, Jennifer shared, be an election judge. Yes. Make your voice heard, that the community should fund elections adequately. So hearing about folks standing online for hours, there's no reason that needs to happen. Thank you for sharing. The ID requirement is voter suppression in your area. Raise funds, gather potential voters to secure the needed ID. Any questions from the group as we have Khyla here? As you think about what that means for you, participating in voting and civic engagement in general, I want to make sure I have some time for any audience questions. How do you balance inspiration and accountability to continue to engage as individuals after the election?
That's a good question, Eric. How do you balance inspiration and accountability? I guess maybe it helped me a little bit more with that because that's an interesting
Sure.
question, but I want to make sure I
Sure. If you
answer
think
it.
about 2008 and 2012, lots of inspiration and excited like, to go out and vote. But I felt like after voting, people just said, okay, I've done my part. Now it's somebody else's job to do everything else and not losing sight of the fact that, you know, even an individual, even as president, only has so much power. To your point about the state legislators and the city councilmen and those kind of, there's lots of groundwork that still needs to happen to facilitate the success of the people that we vote into office.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I really do think is that we meaning us, an elected official in elected administration space, may not do a good enough job to educate folks about how elections run and what different offices do. Because I think if folks understood the power or the lack of power that various offices had, that might help them be able to hold folks accountable in a better kind of a way. But I would also say is that the example of President Obama's presidency and even President Biden's presidency and how that impacts Black people is a refrain that I continuously like. It's difficult, right? Because people are like, well, they didn't do anything for Black people. I'm like, hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on. I'm not trying to here to advocate one way or the other, but it's just trying to lay out facts, right? Like, for example, facts, not partisan. President Biden has appointed more Black judges to federal offices than any other president ever, period. These are lifetime appointments that have an impact on so many different things on the federal level. That is a big thing for Black people, not only just the like global diversification of the federal judiciary, but when he was running for office, Black women said, if we vote for you, this is what we want. The first opportunity, you need to appoint a Black woman to the Supreme Court. Check. We need you to appoint more Black people to the federal judiciary and more people of color to the federal judiciary. Check, check, check. Like almost 100 times, check, right? So when the call comes back and say, okay, I want you to elect me again, we need to be able to say like, okay, this is what I've asked you to do. This is what you have done, and try to marry those two. And so that you can be clear about what has happened, but also what needs to happen going forward. And organizations can help with that. So like your NAACPs, like your National Urban League, like the National Bar Association, American Bar Association, can help you to see clearly what has been done and what needs to be done to go forward. So I think that can help not only continue to be excited about the person if it excites you, but also to hold them accountable because there's more that they need to do. Does that help?
Thank you for that
It,
answer. There was a piece of that though I wanted to kind of like click into when you talked about like the accountability and being clear on what they've done, but you also talked about being clear on your ask. What are the things that we are expecting from our elected officials, and what are we asking for them in order to stand 2, 4, 6 years later, depending on the office, and say like you did fulfill that ask or did not fulfill the ask throughout the process?
Yeah, I mean, it's different for different communities, right?
Mhm.
And so like, but you need to be clear about what you're asking for. I mean, it's just like if you went to dinner and I'm going to, I don't know, whatever, Outback. I want a steak. Okay, well, what kind of steak you want? What kind of temperature do you want it at? Like, it's not helpful just say I want a steak because they'll bring you back whatever. And then you be like, well, this is trash. Well, you didn't tell me what you wanted. So I got you what you asked for. Same rules apply, right? Like I want you to increase the amount of, I need you to increase the amount of funding for sickle cell anemia research because Black people are dying from something that we could solve. Okay, I can look at the budget and see, did the amount of money that DHHS is giving for sickle cell anemia research increase or did it decrease? It's a yes or no. And I can track that over a period of time so that when I go back to that elected official, I can say it was 1.5 billion. Now it's 1.4 billion. Help me understand this, right? And then you continue with the conversation. But if you just say like, I want world peace. Okay, great. I can't do anything with that. I can't do nothing with that. But if what I tell my stars is like, it needs to be measurable and it needs to be actionable. You need to be able to do something about it, and I need to be able to measure how close have you gotten to that thing. And we can work with the delta with it, not to, a pun, but I can work with the difference of it, right? But if I don't have any kind of measurable or actionable asks, I'm just doing pie in the sky. And our communities don't have the luxury of doing pie in the sky. We need to be specific about our ask and what we demand of the people that we send to these offices.
Nice. All right. I think we have time for one more. You hit a little
Sorry,
bit
you asked
on.
the lawyers a question and I will
I
talk
know.
all day.
I love it. You hit a little bit on the impact of Black elected officials and appointed, but there is another question here about in many places districts are so red or blue. How do we drive change in redistricting?
My jam, redistricting. Yeah, well, listen, redistricting is a beast to understand. I've been working with many different entities, including my SARAs, about redistricting. I was the National Census and Redistricting Chair for our sorority over the last decennial census. And it is something that we need to start paying attention to now, not towards the end of this decade when it starts to happen. You need to educate yourself right now about how redistricting works and how the census works so that when the time comes, you can be available to help our communities understand this is who is empowered to draw the lines because it's different in different states. This is where people will be counted because that is in theory in different in different states. And what I mean by that is that some people have prison gerrymandering, some people don't. Or some states do, some states don't. And that determines where people who are incarcerated are counted for state level redistricting, which matters, of course, because in many states, the prisons are in very white, very rural areas, and the people that are housed in those prisons are Black and brown. And so you do not want to falsely inflate a area and starve resources from the Black and brown spaces that those humans are coming from. And so it's important to understand the mechanics of how that redistricting cycle works and understand that you have to be in it for the long haul. We understand that Louisiana, this is 2 years. What is this, 2024? This is almost 3 years after the redistricting cycle got started across the country. Louisiana just finished advocating for a second second congressional district that will likely produce a candidate of choice for the Black and brown community there in Louisiana because they try to concentrate all the Black and brown people into one congressional district when 33% of the people in Louisiana are Black and brown. Yeah. So you have to understand that it's not just a one-time situation. It is a long haul, but it's worth it because it's what I say is it's about money, power, and access. Redistricting determines how much access you will have to your elected officials, how much resources that you will be able to get for that area, and both money and the power that the person has to be able to make changes in your community. So I would encourage you to do the research about redistricting, about the decennial census process, and then engage with those coalition of groups who care about your community so that when it's time to draw those maps, you can help draw those maps, you can help advocate for maps. And then when those maps are passed, hopefully they will be in the best interest of the communities that you serve.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for the questions. So we've covered a lot of ground today, and I know there's so much more to talk about. But if you had a closing thought, if there's one thing you want to make sure that folks walk away from this conversation with and leave really anchored in their spirit, what would that thing be?
I think that we all have the power to shift the dynamics of our community. The question is, how are you going to use your power? A part of your power is your vote, but it's not the only power. But what I will say here today is that it matters whether or not you cast that ballot. So I would encourage you to figure out if you're registered to vote. If you're not registered to vote, register. Figure out when your elections happen, and not just in November, but all throughout the year. And encourage others who may be a little bit leery about the electoral process to understand their power. If we vote in the way that we watched the Usher Bowl on Sunday, then we can make monumental changes for our community that could have impacts for years to come.
And that's not hyperbole. We've seen it happen time and time again in distant and recent history, as you shared. So to anchor back again to what you shared around it matters. It matters before the election. It matters during the election. It matters after the election. And again, tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend. All right.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for joining us today, Khyla. Thank you for everyone who listened in. And if you're going to listen to this on recording, thank you for listening to the recording as well. And we hope this motivates you to think about what your engagement looks like within the process, not only on election day, but before and after as well. Y'all have a great day.